Okay, we've got our repository methods in place. Let's just close these down. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to our controllers and we're going to create a new controller for this functionality. So what we'll do is we'll call it likes controller. And what we'll do inside here is derive from our base API controller. And what we'll need to do is add a constructor for this. And what we're going to do is inject in here, we're going to need access to both our user repository and our likes repository. So we'll inject them both. So we'll say user repository and call it user repository, and we'll say I likes repository and we'll call it likes repository. And let's just go ahead and bring these in and initialize the fields from parameter as well. And do the same for likes. And let's go take a look at what we need in here. So what we're going to do is give the users a method to like another user, of course. And what we'll do, we'll stick with using the username property for this. So we'll open some quotes, add the curly brackets, because this is going to be taken from the root parameters. So our user's going to specify, or our client is going to specify API likes / username. Todd, Jane, Lisa, whoever it is. This is the user that they're going to be liking. And then what we'll do is we'll say public async task, and from here we're going to return an action result. And even though we're technically creating a resource on here, we don't need to return anything back to the client. We already know what the primary key of the created entity is going to be. And we don't need to return that to the client in this case. So we'll add the string of username as a parameter, and let's go ahead and bring in what we need, and ASPNET Core MVC, and we'll need to bring in system threading tasks as well. And we're good. Okay. So what we'll do first of all is we'll make sure we're authenticated to this controller. So we're going to add the authorize property at the top. Obviously, this is functionality that we'd want a user to be logged in for. So we'll say var source user ID is equal to user, and we're going to say get user ID, our new extension method. And we'll say using API extensions. And then what we need to do is we need to get hold of the user that we're liking. So what I'm going to do is say var liked user equals, and we'll say await, and we'll say user repository, and we'll say get user by username async. And then what we'll do is we'll get hold of the source user as well. And we'll say var source user equals await, and we'll go to our likes repository this time because we want to get our user with likes, and we're going to say source user ID in this case. And what we'll do is we'll just add some checks on here to make sure that we don't receive some bad data. So we're going to check to see if we have the liked user. And if this is equal to null, then we're just going to return a not found. We didn't find the user that they wanted to like, so we'll return not found from this. What we'll also check as well to prevent users from liking themselves, which would be possible, we'll say if the source user.username is equal to the username, then we're going to return a bad request. And we're just going to say you cannot like yourself. Well, that sounds a bit mean. Of course people can like themselves, but not in our app. That's not allowed behavior. And then what we'll do, we'll just double check to see if we already have this user like configured and added to our database. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to go and check to see if we have this. So we'll say var user like equals await, and we'll go to likes repository, and we'll say get user like, and we'll say source user ID, and we'll specify the liked user dot ID. And if the user like is not equal to null, then we're going to return a bad request, and we're going to say you already like this user. Now you might want to do something different here. I'm not going to implement this for this demonstration. The idea of this section is to demonstrate many-to-many relationships. I know we're building an app and it looks like kind of a dating app, but this like is just going to go one way. We're going to allow the users to like another user, but I'm not going to allow or not going to implement a toggle here. If you wanted to implement that toggle, then obviously if you do already have this like, then you could do something to remove the like and give the users a toggle option. We're not going down as far as that in this. We're going to keep things straightforward so that we can focus on the learning goals, which is looking at the many-to-many relationships. So what I'll say then is that our user like, if we don't have one, then we're going to create one. And I'm going to say new user like, and we'll bring this in from API entities. And we'll say the source user ID is equal to the source user ID, and we'll say the liked user ID is equal to the liked user.id. And that's all we need to do for this, because we've only got 2 columns, and we're just going to put these inside there. And then what we'll do is we'll actually add the user like, and we'll do this to the source user. We'll say source user, and we'll say liked users, and we'll say add, and we'll add the user like. And then we can go ahead and save our changes. So we'll say if await, and we'll say, oh, we didn't actually add a save method in our likes repository. So we'll make use of the user repository for the time being. Consider this temporary, what we're doing here, because now we've got more than one repository. We need to think about how many instances of the data context we have and what we're doing here. But we're not going to break anything from now, and this will work. But what we'll take a look at later is looking at a better option for what we're doing here, specifically when it comes to saving changes and all of the different entities that Entity Framework is tracking. But we won't run into any problems for now, and we will take a look at the architecture pattern we'll use for that. It's called unit of work. If you're familiar with that, that's what we'll be implementing later. But for now, to keep us moving forward, we'll just use that. And then if we get down here and the save failed, then what we'll do is we'll return a bad request, and we'll say failed to like user. And then what we need is just another method to go and get the user likes. So what we'll do is we'll just add an HTTP get, and we're going to take this as a query string parameter, so we don't need anything additional in the root parameters here. And we'll say public async task, and we'll say action results, and we're going to return an IEnumerable of like DTO, and we'll call this get liked users, or more accurately get user likes, because it could be either one of those. And we'll take the string of the predicates. What are they looking for? And what we'll do is we'll return, and we'll say await and likes repository, and we'll say get user likes, and this takes our predicates, and it also takes the user ID of the currently logged in user, so we'll say user.get user ID. And what have we missed in here? We need system collections generic, and we need our like DTO. And the action result doesn't work so well with an interface like IEnumerable. So what we'll do is we'll say var users equals, and then what we'll do is we'll return OK, and we'll pass our users into this. And that resolves that particular problem. So what we'll do is we'll just run a couple of quick tests inside Postman. And let's see, we're in section 14, so I'm just going to log in as Lisa and save the token. And that's fine. And let's go and add a like for somebody from Lisa. So we've got API/likes Todd, and in the body we don't add anything inside here. And of course we need to send this up with our bearer token, so we'll click send. And we get a 404 not found. This is quite common for adding a new API controller. What we need to do when we see this, our first troubleshooting step is to stop the API and then restart it again. As sometimes the file watcher doesn't pick up the endpoints for a new controller. So let's give that another go. And I'll click send again. And this time we get a status of 200 OK. So far so good. If I click on get liked users, then what we need to do here is add the predicate. So I'll just add predicate equals liked. Otherwise we won't get any results back because we're not using a switch statement and we're just using conditionals in there. So we need to predicate of who the user has liked, and we'll click send, and we can see Todd is in this list. And if I get the opposite, the liked by users, then what we should find is this is an empty array. And that's what we would expect. Lisa hasn't been liked by any other users. So I'm going to presume that's okay, and what we'll do is we'll swing over to the client and start setting this up in Angular.